Welcome to This Must Be the Place. I'm your host, Allo Gilinsky. Each week, I'll uncover what's happening in Sonoma County, diving into the hidden gems and quirky corners. I'll be interviewing some of our local legends, as well as people you didn't know you need to know, all through the eyes of a craft beer enthusiast living in wine country. Join me as we explore one sip, one story, and one adventure at a time, and together we'll find out why this must be the place. Today we're headed in the way back machine to the summer of 1975 to the movie event of the year. That's right, it's Steven Spielberg's Jaws, celebrating its 50th anniversary with special screenings at Sebastopol's Rialto Cinemas starting August 29th. And here to talk to me today about one of the cinema's most influential films is the Rialto's very own Kai Boyd. It's an honor to have him on here, and I'm excited to talk all things Jaws. So welcome, Kai. I can't wait to talk to you about Jaws, which I have to confess I just saw a few days ago for the first time ever.
Well, I saw it in 1979 when it was reissued by Universal Studios. And I saw it at the Fox Holiday Theater in Great Falls, Montana, which is an 800-seat single-screen theater with a giant screen. It's where I saw Star Wars and Grease and Superman and all kinds of great big, 70s movies. And I think I was 15 years old, and it was
Wow.
scary. It was scary.
I bet, especially on a screen that big. And if I'm not mistaken, Great Falls, Montana's population is not much bigger than that theater. I've been there myself once in 2019, believe it or not.
Well, it was about 50,000 then.
Okay.
And what's really interesting is because when I was preparing for this interview today, I was doing some research last night, and to get a sense of the size of the phenomenon that Jaws was when it came out in 1975, I went back into the archives of the Great Falls Tribune, and I found, when the film opened, and it played in Great Falls, Montana, a town of 50,000 people, in an 800-seat theater for 12 weeks.
Wow.
I mean, nothing lasted 12 weeks. Most things stayed 2 or 3 weeks max. So it was really a phenomenon of its time. And that's borne out by the fact that in 1975, it grossed $272 million at the box office. And the next highest grossing movie of 1975 only grossed 108 million, and that was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest.
That's some perspective right there. And I guess, that kind of bleeds into my very first question. Give me the lowdown. Why are we still talking about a film from 50 years ago?
Well, it's a film that really changed the business model for the movie industry. It proved that you could take a high concept movie, meaning something that can be described in 1 or 2 sentences, and sell it nationwide. Up until the point prior to Jaws being released, there were the only movies that got released on 400 or more movie theaters at a time were schlocky exploitation things, and the theory was you got in, you got your money, and you got out before the word of mouth got out. And most major quality studio movies weren't released in the summer. They were released in the fall and winter, and the summer was a dumping ground.
Right.
And so you'd start out in New York and LA, and then you'd slowly add runs and do, what today we call a platform release. And that was the norm for, big Hollywood movies. But Jaws totally changed that, and it proved that people would go to the movies in summer, and it wasn't a dumping ground. And so it was really the first, big summer blockbuster.
Right. And I was just about to say, now we see Marvel and all these movies coming out and the summer blockbusters, the summer action films, and maybe Jaws is really the movie that paved the way for all of that. I mean, there's a lot of us who don't remember, maybe weren't born yet. Was that the sole reason the film was such a big deal? Was it subject matter? Was it the fact that it had the staying power? What would you say in your expertise and opinion?
Well, it was the Peter Benchley novel that the movie is based on had been a sensation. it was a, it was a huge best-selling novel, and it had had its own impacts in the book business, which I'm not qualified to talk about. But I'm curious, since you just saw the movie, how much do you think it cost to make Jaws?
Oh, I couldn't. I mean, I have no background knowledge of what it costs to make a movie, but I can imagine the budget was low to middle range. In fact, to me, it seemed like it was almost two separate movies, and I can get into that a little bit later on.
Yeah, well, I thought this was interesting. It was budgeted to be a $4 million movie, and it was scheduled to be a 55-day shoot. And the budget ballooned to $9 million, and the production ran 159 days.
That's triple the time. Wow.
Yeah, and they shot in the Atlantic Ocean.
Right.
And Spielberg says, if I hadn't been so headstrong and naive, I would have never shot in the ocean because it caused them all kinds of problems shooting in the ocean.
I can
So
only imagine.
yeah, so yeah, there are lots of stories. Somebody actually wrote a play called The Shark is Broken, which is about the making of Jaws.
Really?
Yeah.
So it's spanned it's gone through the different arts. It has movies, it has the movie, it's inspired a play. It's everywhere. It's omnipresent, I guess I would say. And what was its influence on the film industry itself? Like as you kind of touched on at the very beginning, it might have been the first blockbuster, but what else would you say was its influence on the film industry?
Well, it was kind of the it was a lightning bulb for the studios in that you could make a movie for not a ton of money, and you could make a ton of money with this movie that you made for not a lot of money. Because they made it for 9 million, it grossed 272 million. So it was highly, highly profitable. And so, Hollywood, spotted that and went, oh, you know, simple premise, high concept, sell it in the summer, and it's a path to make money. And you can see that Jaws is the precursor to Star Wars and all sorts of summer blockbusters. So,
And to that extent, do you think that maybe had an impact, on Spielberg's career and trajectory? What was the impact on his career? How did the film influence the filmmakers of his generation following that?
well, I mean, prior to its release, he thought he would never get another studio job again because he went 100 days over. But it did highly influence his career. And the thing of it is that the movie that Spielberg made is much different than the movie that he intended to
Oh,
make.
really?
Yeah, because the movie is much more Hitchcockian than he was originally intending. It was supposed to have a lot more shark in it, but they had three sharks. They had these, mechanical sharks that they would use, and they kept having problems with them, and the sharks wouldn't work. And so they ended up with sometimes just using the dorsal fin coming through the water and going with a really less is more approach, which actually really enhances the movie. If the shark had been much more overt and present in the movie, it wouldn't have had the impact. So the fact that they had problems making the movie actually helped the end product.
I could definitely see that. I mean, sitting there in suspense is built by not seeing the shark. You have the presence of the shark, you have the score, which we'll touch on a little bit later. But I agree, but not having the shark as front and center lends itself to a lot of what I feel like was the movie's, emotional success for me.
Yeah, and um, the movie was a huge influence. If you look at tourism statistics for 1975 and 1976, beach tourism was down because of afraid of sharks. And Spielberg said one of his regrets about making the movie is that there was a huge effort to hunt and kill sharks, and
Mhm.
so he negatively impacted the shark population of the planet, and he regrets that. So,
That's fascinating. And I guess Big Beach probably wasn't too happy either.
um, No, probably not. Took me
And
a
speak.
second there because there's a film production company called Big
Oh,
Beach.
is there? See, that's my naivety in the film world. But no, I was just coming up with a blanket name for, we're basically on the Sonoma Coast out here, and we're actually talking to a shark expert, David McGuire, on the Sonoma Coast coming up. So I'll have to get his kind of feedback on what he remembers of that whole thing going down. But along with that, what would you say the film's effect on American culture was? As you said, people were maybe afraid to go to the beach. Spielberg said that it led to a lot of shark hunting. What else would you say, affected American culture just from the presence of Jaws?
Well, it trained the audiences and the studios to go to the movies in the summer. It proved that people would go to the movies in the summer, and that they would go to the movie multiple times. So I think that's part of its legacy. Um, Pardon me. It's probably one of the first films, along with The Exorcist, that really frightened people such that people would have what today we would call panic attacks
Sure.
in the theater, or they would, after they'd seen the movie, they would hear about sharks and they would have these panic attacks. It really was a cultural and psychological phenomenon because it was so intense. It harkens back to Hitchcock's Psycho.
Right.
So,
Yeah, and I mean, people are afraid of the sharks, are afraid of water before they even saw the movie, and claustrophobia, things like that. So it really plays to human fears and emotions before they even go into the movie. And I guess some people would really have to want to take a flyer on it to see it, which again speaks to the staying power of maybe Spielberg's name and the movie itself. That people are willingly going to see this, maybe knowing that they're going to be a little scared, a little played with as they sit through it.
right. And, and for people who've read the book, they sort of know what's coming, but, a film is a different medium.
Absolutely.
I've never read the book, so I don't know.
Not yet. There's still time, I'm sure. I know you're a busy guy.
Yeah.
So let's switch a little bit. Let's talk about the score and John Williams. And I mean, as I was saying, the score kind of really ramped up that intensity for me, kind of the mysteriousness and the oh no factor. But what would you say the score's effect and John Williams' part had in making the score such a success for the movie?
Well, the score is very interesting because, the principal theme, the dana, 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 it's really two notes and it's played on a tuba. And it really set John Williams on a path. He'd done one other film with Steven Spielberg prior to that, The Sugarland Express. And, he and Spielberg are really intertwined, and the Jaws score got him a lot of jobs. A lot of jobs. And he really elevated the place of film music, which was largely kind of regarded as disposable. So,
Sure.
Jaws had a soundtrack release. The movie had that much effect that they actually released score to Jaws, which has no songs, as a record that people would buy.
And it's still
So,
one of those prevalent dun dun. You hear it today. You hear it being reused in other movies. You hear it all over the reels of TikTok and Instagram world. It is one of those just prevalent sounds that stays with us. That's carried over from generations of people kind of associating that with Jaws and therefore terror and the
right.
unknown, which is
It's just like
fascinating.
the
Right.
of Psycho. It's that really how it is so associated with the movie and so built into it, and and it's amazingly simple, but it's the right two notes and dun dun, yeah. It's it holds up. It's a scary movie.
And sometimes it just shows to go that simple is the way to be. You don't overcomplicate things.
Yeah.
So to wrap this up, talking about the film, the score, what do you think the film's lasting legacy is? If you could put it in a couple sentences, it's still here after 50 years. And what do you think the film's legacy really is?
Well, like I said, I think the film really changed the perception of Hollywood about, how you could make money on a motion picture. It reset expectations and set expectations for really high ticket sales and really high profitability. So in some ways, Jaws is responsible for the dumbing down of cinema. and for the end of the auteur era that we had experienced in the first half of the 70s. And you can really see that there's like a dividing line in 1976 of, things, you start seeing more high concept pictures, and you don't have as many Godfathers and the Stings and One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest and um things like that. I mean, it's interesting because 1975 was an interesting year because the top grossing film was Jaws. Number two, as I mentioned, was One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. Number three was Shampoo. Number four was Dog Day Afternoon. And number five was Blake Edwards' Return of the Pink Panther.
Sure.
So, there's quite a range there. And I think in some ways, the idea of that so much dominates Hollywood now about, one film dominates a weekend, which I fight against this perception all the time, really started with Jaws.
Well, very cool. Now, why should people go out and see it on the big screen? Maybe for the first time or again after all these years?
Well, it's scary. And it's it's a movie that was made for cinema. It was made to be seen on a big screen. Home video viewing wasn't really imagined in 1975. Movies did play on television. And when it finally did play on television in the fall of 1979, it gathered one of the biggest audiences for a motion picture ever on television. But I really think that it's a film that it holds up. It holds up really, really well. And one of the things, sort of talking about its legacy and its impact is that, they were really smart in the costume design and everything because Spielberg didn't want to use the color red in anything, not the boat, not the costumes, nothing. So it makes the red of the blood that much more amplified because you don't see red anywhere else in the movie.
That's so fascinating, especially for somebody who maybe wasn't paying that attention to that on a first watch. I'd love to go back and kind of have that in mind to see just how much it plays into the ethos and pathos of watching it.
Well, you can do that because starting on August 29th, we're bringing Jaws back for 1 week here at Rialto Cinemas and in movie theaters across the country.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's the time to do it, right? It's
Yeah,
summer, it's
the
hot,
50th anniversary.
and
And
it's the
so,
50th anniversary. There's no better time to celebrate. And if we were going to come to the Rialto and make a weekend out of the event, what's the best double feature? Would you pair Jaws with anything else you have coming up, or would you
well,
say just have a meal in between?
I would pair it with a classic movie, and I have five options.
Five options. All right, lay them on me, Kai.
Okay, one is The Deep, which is the 1977 film starring Nick Nolte and Jacqueline Bisset, which was made from Peter Benchley's next novel.
Okay.
And it's a bit of a horror, scary movie. Alien, because it's another high concept, scary. It's, the pitch for Alien was Jaws in space.
Ah.
Star Wars, the original Star Wars, Episode 4, A New Hope, as the true fans would call it, because that was the film that most Jaws, most directly influenced. But I'd also consider going back to Psycho because there's a lot of similarities between the two. And then if you want to get a little weird, you could do Joe Dante's film Piranha, which Spielberg has described as the best of the Jaws ripoffs.
Okay.
And if you want to celebrate another film that was released in 1975, that's also celebrating 50 years this fall, and was marketed as a different set of Jaws, you could do the Rocky Horror Picture Show.
Rocky Horror Picture Show. Fantastic. I think all of those options you probably can't go wrong with and would make for a great double feature after seeing Jaws at the Rialto. Speaking of the Rialto, what else is happening down the pipeline at the Rialto? After the waters have cleared, everything's not been murky anymore, and Jaws is off screen. What should folks know about and make time for coming up?
Well, we are the in-theater capture of the original Broadway cast of Hamilton is coming on September 5th, and that's going to be on the big screen for the first time. And we also have a return engagement of The Sound of Music starting on September 12th. September 12th is also when Downton Abbey, the grand finale, opens. We got a lot of cool stuff.
That's
So
great. I've never seen Sound of Music on the big screen, so that might be one I have to make time to come down for and hang out. I
yeah,
also
you're
know
gonna
you
have to
got
come
to.
see Jaws too.
I'll come see Jaws. Maybe I'll make it a double feature with something else you have going on there. I know you have a lot of great food and drink to kind of keep myself sustained in between movie viewings. And yeah, if there's anything else you want to say about the Rialto or Jaws to wrap things up,
Well,
I'll let you have the
I want to
floor.
say that this is a lot of people probably don't know this, but Jaws was edited by a woman. Her name was Verna Fields, and she was on set every single day and involved with production. And she is really one of the, you know, grand dames of female film editors. And she's sadly no longer with us, but she went on to edit a lot of movies that you know of and heard of. And she started her career as a sound editor.
Very cool. Little known fact about the movies brought to you by Kai Boyd, the director of Rialto Cinemas. Kai, I want to thank you so much for being on here with us
My
today.
pleasure.
And
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
we look forward to coming down to the Rialto. All our viewers out there should get down to Jaws starting August 29th at the Rialto in Sebastopol. And we will again catch up with you soon. Maybe we'll do a little late fall or winter preview of what's going on with you later on. Thank you
That'd
so
be great.
much.
I get back from the Toronto International Film Festival on September 16th. So I'd love to talk about what's coming up after based on what I saw in Toronto.
Sounds like a great time, Kai. Again, thanks for your time, and we'll connect soon. Cheers. With Jaws celebrating its 50th anniversary and our local movie theater screening it, we've got sharks on the brain. So we thought it would be a great time to talk with a shark expert, learn a little bit more about these misunderstood creatures and their importance to the Sonoma coast. Here to help make us smarter is David McGuire, a marine biologist, shark specialist, and the founder of the Bay Area shark conservation nonprofit, Shark Stewards. Hey, David, thanks so much for joining us today.
You're welcome. Great to be with you.
I'm really excited to have you here. We have sharks on the brain and Jaws back on the big screen. People are heading to the beaches for Labor Day weekend. And I've got to imagine this is one of the sharkiest moments in pop culture we've probably had in a while, huh?
It seems to be a bit of a resurgence with the 50-year anniversary of Jaws, which is hard to comprehend for me.
It's definitely been a moment in pop culture, and it's cool to have somebody else from the shark world kind of give us some feedback and thoughts. So, since we've been talking about Jaws, how did the book and movie's popularity affect, the public's perception of sharks and marine life? Did we even think about sharks before the movie?
Uh, if you were in the water as a surfer or a diver, yes, because it's sort of an ever-present reality, even true today. But I think Jaws really brought it up in the public conscious. It definitely escalated exponentially, I'm sure. So, it's a powerful book. It's a good movie. I lived through the Jaws era. I remember seeing it at a drive-in as a kid. I was a teenager. I was a surfer at the time, and I remember the conversations and also uh, the people in the water. The whole vibe really changed a lot, and obviously, Jaws has left a lasting impression. Unfortunately, in a negative sense, when it comes to white sharks or great white sharks, there was a retaliation in California and elsewhere. There were tournaments, there were vendetta killings, and there was actually started up a commercial fishery. We were eating great white sharks in
Wow.
the 80s, and we essentially impacted that population so severely that it went to near extinction. There was actually a local extinction. That is, there was a huge impact on the shark population, which white sharks never large at all. Um, and so there were some serious repercussions, and we have seen a reversal in that trend, fortunately, in the past decade or so when it comes to shark protection. But globally, sharks are still in deep trouble.
Sure. I mean, that's wild that, a movie, a pop culture kind of resurgence phenomenon can really have that big of an effect on a population of a species. And it's kind of wild to see that on a larger scale or think about it, especially since I wasn't around back when Jaws first came out. And so to think about that is wild to me. Would you say that Jaws maybe lent itself to your interest in sharks, or were you later interested in sharks for other reasons?
Yeah, not really. I was pretty young, but was interested in becoming a marine biologist, which I became. I loved the ocean as a kid, and when I started surfing, I really fell in love with it, and then became a scuba diver at 16. Uh, so I was fascinated more about the ocean itself than sharks, and I really didn't get into the shark world until decades later. My graduate work's in marine toxicology, and I really worked in more conservation. And when I started to get involved with sharks, it was because I documented and uh, observed and reported on shark finning and killing sharks just for their fins, and actually photographed it and ended up making a documentary over 25 years ago, I guess, or 20 years ago, um, on man bites shark, not shark bites man.
Now, what would you think, just touching on Jaws one more time, what do you think the movie got right or wrong about great whites or sharks in general?
Well, it certainly got right the cast of characters, what unusual people, marine biologists and mayors, and Quint is a fisherman. The characters were really great. But
Believable, huh?
in a way, yeah, the Scar story on the boat is kind of funny with Chief Brody and uh, Richard Dreyfuss, and that happens all the time. I hear that all the time with high risk lifestyle friends of mine. They start t telling your stories about your scars. But the shark was so unrealistic, and it was a sort of a animatron, not animatron, sort of a robotic shark. So they had so many problems in the making of the field in the film that Spielberg didn't even bring the shark on stage until almost two-thirds of the way through the film, which actually created a huge amount of suspense and was very effective. Worked in their favor. Now with CG and AI, a lot of the films, the sharks are a lot more believable. But Jaws had something of that, that the drama and the suspense and the buildup that made for a really great movie. Probably a little unrealistic from a life perspective, but there are some truisms. The mayor not wanting to close the beaches that the police chief wanted to because of concerns about impacts of tourism. That still happens, and people don't want to act sometimes in the interest of public safety if it is going to impact the bottom line. Uh,
Sure.
I have to give a shout out actually to Marin County, Labor Day. Oh gosh, it must have been 8, 10 years ago. There was a beach closure at Stinson Beach, and Stinson Beach is like Amity. It's a little town, relies on tourism, especially during Labor Day. There's a great deal of money, and there had been an incident, and so they closed the beach over Labor Day. And I'm sure that was painful for the city fathers, but it was the right move to make for the interest of public safety.
Absolutely. I mean, you have to take all those things into account. As I mentioned in my little intro to our conversation, you work for Shark Stewards, and I'd love you to tell us a little bit more about your work with them.
Yeah, so I founded Shark Stewards in 2006. At the time, I worked at UC Berkeley for the biology department, and I went on an expedition across the Pacific, and we were diving in French Polynesia, and I was given a camera because I was an underwater, not an underwater cameraman. I was actually above water, but I was the closest thing to an underwater photographer we had. And we were looking at coral reef ecosystems, and of course in the Tuamotus, which is an archipelago of about 100 atolls and coral reefs, there were a lot of reef sharks at the time. And it was exciting when you get in, and sometimes there might be 100 sharks. So I got interested in filming them, and we were also looking at the ecosystem and the coral reef structure and health, and looked at islands that had healthy, intact ecosystems, very low human habitation. There's not very much emergent land in these atolls, and most of them is either fishermen or pearl farmers or coconut farmers. And so they're very, very light human impact. But what we were seeing in some of these reefs were they had been overfished completely. There were no sharks at all. And we started to ask, like, why are there sharks here and no sharks in the other areas? And the locals told us it was the tuna fishermen kill the sharks not for food because Polynesians typically don't eat sharks. It was for shark fins. And this seemed crazy to us, like kind of inconceivable until we saw the sharks on the bottom without their fins, saw it occurring. Actually ended up documenting and going on a ship in Papeete Harbor, Tahiti. The whole ship loading up with tuna was lined with shark fins and no sharks. So I made a film called Shark Stewards of the Reef. And once I had learned the magnitude of sharks that were being killed, estimated around 73 million a year at the time,
Wow.
just for the shark fin trade, I had a real shift in my life focus and founded Shark Stewards to protect sharks from this depredation, particularly the shark fin trade, but in general, overfishing sharks and their loss of habitat and in general disregard for sharks. Like we did not care. A lot of emphasis has been put on saving the whales in the 70s, and that was what I grew up with, and we've done a very good job globally. And there's a great empathy I think we have and connection for our fellow mammals, and less so for our fishy friends. And so
Sure.
that's part of Shark Steward's mission is to try to turn that narrative around and our perceptions, and that sharks are actually among the most, if not the most important animal swimming in the ocean.
Well, that sounds like you're doing some really fantastic work, and just the awareness part is so key these days, I think. As you know, we're up here doing this Sonoma County local podcast, and I kind of wanted to ask you, talk to us about the Red Triangle and the importance of the Sonoma coast to sharks. For those listeners out there who don't know what the Red Triangle is, it's the name of a roughly triangle-shaped region off the coast of Northern California, extending from Bodega Bay, slightly out to the Farallon Islands, and down to the Big Sur region south of Monterey. So if you just wanted to kind of talk about the importance of sharks to that region and what that does, that would be fantastic.
Yeah, it's the Red Triangle is kind of infamous, I guess, particularly if you're a diver or surfer in sort of the, I guess, bounded by the areas bounding the Bay Area, particularly the Farallon Islands, which is a true hotspot, major feeding ground. But Point Reyes, Salmon Creek, Bodega Head, down Big Sur, there are Monterey, of course. There's a high incidence of shark activity and shark encounters with humans. I think about 38% was something, a figure that comes to mind of all white shark human encounters. That does not mean fatalities. That doesn't even mean serious bites, but bumps, bites, touches are considered an incident. So there have been about 225, I think, since 1950, according to Fish and Wildlife records in California, and around 200 of those involve white sharks. And so, shark attack capital of the world is not here. It's actually very rare. Every other year or so, there's a bite. We have one fatality every 4 or 5 years. It's been since I think 2022 was the last one in California down in Big Morro Bay. But it's actually high in our zeitgeist, I guess,
Mhm.
especially if you're a surfer or a diver, the two highest risk groups. So Salmon Creek is very sharky. I've surfed there a lot. I have seen white sharks there. There have been, I think, 6 or 7 incidents there, all on surfers. But the more serious bites have tended to be on the divers, particularly out at the Farallon Islands, where sharks investigate with their teeth, and you're on the receiving end. It's a pretty serious uh, tool chest that white sharks have.
Sure.
They don't have hands. They don't use their fins to feel. They feel with their mouths, and they have about 300 serrated teeth, about 2 to 3 inches long, can do some serious damage. But on the upside, over 90% of people survive on the West Coast of the Northeast Pacific here in California, Oregon, Washington, and down to Baja because of uh, we have a good emergency response system, but also typically the sharks don't come back for seconds. They realize that we're not their favorite prey, and if we can get emergency first aid, stabilized, and treatment, there's a high survival rate.
Absolutely. So you touched on kind of the surfers being high risk. What are some of the precautions they might need to take or should take when they're considering being out in the waters?
Well, read the signs, both literally,
Sure.
Stinson Beach has a permanent sign that sharks live there. Uh, you look for bird activity or seal activity. We call it sharky water. You can feel it. You can feel something's not quite right, and you can see the behavior of animals if there's a predator near. Obviously, if there's a recent predation event, it's generally on the internet now through social media. So if you're going to surf in a place, be aware of the relative risk. And if you don't want to accept that risk, surf someplace else. So the more remote areas, obviously, are going to have higher risk because you're going to have less access to uh, safety and emergency response. But surf with a buddy, dive with a buddy. That's a maximum in scuba diving. You don't go alone.
Right.
Um, you're more likely to be investigated if you are swimming or surfing alone by a white shark than you are if you are in a group. Get out of the water if you see a shark and let others know. There are other things, we used to joke about yum yum yellow, that sharks like the yellow the most. We feel that's not true any longer. But sometimes contrasting surfboards as opposed to, a black wetsuit and a dark board will form a silhouette that might look more like a seal. There's been experiments in Australia that seem to show some success with a pattern, like a stripy pattern. I think surfers don't want to look ridiculous. Uh, Throwing back again to the 80s with the flamboyant fluorescent wetsuits. And I think surfers just want to look cool. But so they don't want stripy or weird looking wetsuits. Some do. But have been some experiments with different shapes and different contrasting uh, colors that don't have a huge amount of statistical significance, but perhaps some increase in safety with a contrast on the bottom of your board. Um,
Interesting.
yeah, so there's a number of steps we can take, but really it's just try to use common sense.
Common
Uh,
sense, awareness, the buddy system. I mean, these are all things that have kind of been
yeah,
you should be instilled in you since you started being in the water,
yeah, but we don't.
but you don't. Sometimes you're just caught
And
up in the
also
moment.
runoff is a big thing. I spend about half my year working in Hawaii, and tiger sharks are the real issues. And there's traditional knowledge, and it's don't swim when the willy blossoms. It's a tree, and it's basically in the rainy months, and that's in Kauai and the high runoff islands, Maui and Oahu. That's when you see more fatalities from tiger sharks because of low water visibility. So again, they're biting first and asking questions later.
Right.
And so, same thing for California. I mean, sharks are visual creatures, and there is a misconception that sharks have bad eyesight, where white sharks actually have very good eyesight and very high acuity with contrast. So they are visual. So if you're having low light conditions or low visibility from runoff, that is another risk factor. So don't surf near a river mouth, right? Salmon Creek gets pretty poor visibility when the water is really running.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, you were saying you're in Hawaii. You were just in Hawaii, actually. You travel, especially during the summer. This is active season for you. I'm sure you've had many encounters with sharks out there, but do you have one exciting encounter with sharks that you can tell us about, one that really sticks out in your mind?
Uh, I mean, I seek sharks out. We're working on another film right now on the Pacific monuments and traditional marine management, marine protection, but also the perception of sharks that Polynesians have, which is far different than most cultures. They rever sharks and venerate them. Um, and so we're in the water with tiger sharks a lot. And this was a disappointing summer. Couldn't get a shark to come close enough to get any good shots this year, which is unusual. Um, but as far as unusual and encounters, I've had many. I mean, I dived the Farallon Islands. I've dove with bull sharks. I think one of my shark attack story is when kids are, I do a lot of public speaking and I talk to kids and they always want to know if I've been bitten by a shark. And I say,
I'm a big
yeah.
36-year-old kid, and I still want to know if you've been bitten by a shark. So,
Well, it was actually when we were filming Shark Stewards of the Reef, and we're at this a pass, which is how the water gets in and out of the atoll, which is a ring of coral with a central lagoon. And this is where the sharks really aggregate, and they kind of fly in the current, and particularly the gray reef sharks, and they can get a little aggressive towards the evening, and they kind of sleep during the day. And we'd just been in this sort of spawning event of groupers, and it was really exciting. I mean, the sharks were zipping around, and we decided we better get out, for safety. And so I got out of the water and I was walking across the coral reef flat, which is sort of a little puddle of water above the coral crest of dead coral, and between the island and the living reef. And it's about 2 foot of water. And I was walking through carrying my camera, and suddenly something grabbed my ankle from behind, and I jumped out and ran one way, and this little baby reef shark that had grabbed my ankle didn't even penetrate my booty, didn't realize that what it thought was a fish was attached to 6 feet above it, and it went the other way. So there's my shark attack story.
very good. You have a shark attack story, and you live to tell the tale. Tell us about Sharktoberfest.
With the Greater Farallones National Marine Sanctuary, that we wanted to change people's minds about sharks, particularly white sharks. And so I approached the Academy and also the Farallones, who are involved with white shark research and conservation. And there's a great education team. And I said, let's celebrate the return of the white sharks to the sanctuary after their migration, because the mature white sharks do migrate. They do leave the area and they swim. Some do swim to Hawaii, but some swim to what's called the White Shark Cafe in the Central Pacific, where they're feeding and probably breeding. And then they return every fall. And so that's a time and that highest human shark interactions in the Red Triangle, if you will, in the Bay Area and Northern California. So we wanted to kind of create these events that would raise awareness, doing what you and I are doing today about trying to reduce our risk of a shark attack, but also to realize that the actual relative risk is inconsequential. 1 in 17 million is your risk of getting bit by a shark in California. It's much higher in, for example, Florida, which is Volusia County's shark attack capital of the world. And most people don't die. They get bit in the hands and legs. And so we created these events called Sharktoberfest. And, what better than beer and sharks? So we're we typically do it with the Farallones, but because of the huge budget cuts to NOAA, tragically, and loss of part of the education team and science team, we're just going to do an education event at Aquatic Park in Berkeley, where we actually have this little shark park and a research project with UC Berkeley on local sharks and rays in October 12th.
One last question before I sign off with you here. How can people get involved in Shark Stewards in your organization, and what's coming up for folks to look forward to, especially those who might be around Sonoma County?
Yeah, a big part of our work is public education and engagement. We do beach cleanups, and we've really been focusing on data collection with UC Berkeley on plastic pollution and also this shark project. So California Coastal Cleanup Day is September 20th. That's all over. That's the largest volunteer event in California and maybe the world. So that's going to be happening in Sonoma County. We have our Sharktoberfest October 12th down in the Bay Area. People want to come down. We also lead trips out to the Farallones starting September 21st. And we go out to the Farallon Islands. We do those once a week on weekends into November. And there's always a great opportunity if people want to learn more about the ocean to look up the Sonoma MPA Collaborative or California Marine Protected Area Network. Bodega Bay Marine Lab would be a great destination or a great place to look to see what's really happening on the Sonoma coast.
David, this is so fantastic to get a chance to talk to you. If there's any last things you want to say before we sign off, the floor is yours.
Sure. Well, if you go to sharkstewards.org, you can look up there the 10 top things you can do to avoid getting bit by a white shark, and other links to educational science sheets and activities that we are doing in the Bay Area.
Well, great. Well, hey, thank you so much, David. We appreciate it. And I look forward to seeing what's going on with Shark Stewards. And I might make my way down to Sharktoberfest in the next couple weeks.
That'd be great.
All right. Take care. The interviews are done, which means I think it's time to crack one open. Interviews make me thirsty, and I want you thirsting for knowledge about some great beer, both local and not so local. Each week, I'll introduce you to a beer I find discussion-worthy and explain the nuances of what makes it fantastic in my eyes and why you should give it a try. And just to keep it on point, I'll even try to make sure the beer reflects the vibe or theme of the episode. I am pouring into my glass North Coast Brewing Scrimshaw Pilsner. I mean, after talking about a movie with such a history as Jaws, a beer from a brewery with an equally outstanding legacy that's just about to turn 37 years old seemed only appropriate. North Coast Brewing has been making fantastic lagers and ales from the coast of California, and other than Old Rasputin Stout, there may be none other more iconic than its Scrimshaw Pilsner. Named for the delicate engravings popularized by 19th century seafarers, Scrimshaw uses noble hops from Europe, such as Hallertauer and Tettnang. It's not overpoweringly hoppy. It's crisp and refreshing with a dry finish. Some might say it's the perfect beer to calm any choppy waters out there, whether that's after a long day at work, being enjoyed on a boat, or even after escaping a fight with a shark. At 4.5%, it's a great lager for the last dog days of August, and it's a beer found far and wide. You can most certainly snag it at your local Oliver's Market, or right here in Sebastopol at Pacific Market or Whole Foods. Thank you to our guests Kai Boyd and David McGuire for great conversations, and to our listeners for tuning in. Remember to get out to see Jaws beginning on August 29th at the Rialto Cinemas in Sebastopol, and head out to that beautiful Sonoma coast. This Must Be the Place is produced by our friends at Pod Locally, an audio platform helping local voices connect to their communities. Don't forget to like, subscribe, or comment on all your favorite podcast apps, and visit the show notes for more information, links, and resources. Look out for our next drop next Sunday night, where we'll be heading from screen to stage as we preview Sonoma County's fall theater scene. Cheers, and until then, I'm Allo Gilinsky saying have a great week.